It's Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles, back with another great event. Joining me today is my dear friend, Rob Shapiro. Rob, welcome.
Glad to be here. Always glad to join you.
For those of you who don't know, Rob and I have been collaborating, talking, doing things together for over 30 years. He was chief economic advisor to Bill Clinton in the 92 campaign, undersecretary of commerce, just one of the leading economists in our side over the last generation. And he has a new piece that he just published in the Washington Monthly. Lincoln, if you can show it. Yeah. Called Affordability, How Trump Has Made It Worse. This is kind of the issue of the moment, Rob. So I'm just going to turn it to you. Walk us through your, I strongly recommend it to everybody. It is a valuable contribution to understanding how we got to this point where prices and affordability are really driving everything in our politics right now. So Rob, take it away.
Well, most of the discussion about affordability focuses on prices, and prices are only half the issue. Affordability is the intersection between increases in prices and increases in income. If your income goes up 10% and prices go up 5%, well, you don't have much of an affordability issue. But if prices go up 10% and your income goes up 5%, you've got a real problem. And what we've had, there's one other thing to remember about inflation, and that is people have a muscle memory of it. Their perception and response to inflation is not about the last month. It's about the last several years. And in this case, it's really about the last 5 years. From right before the pandemic, inflation was very low, to today. And over that period, prices overall have risen 25%. That's overall. Some things have increased more than that. And in particular, housing, rent, and food are up 31%. Electricity is up 37%. Beef is up 55%. There are a couple things that increased in price over this 5-year period, but less than the average. Drugs, actually, prescription drugs, only up 6%. And gasoline is up 15%. But the things that people really rely on most, food, electricity, housing, or rent, those are all outstripping inflation. That's one way to understand why people feel there's an affordability crisis. The other half is what's happened to incomes over that whole period, over the last 5 years. Overall, the median income of American households after inflation is flat. It is almost exactly today where it was in December 2019. So the median household has made no progress after inflation. Then we can, but income, it has 2 or 3 main parts. The biggest part for most people is earnings. And so we looked at earnings. And one of the things that's really striking is that earnings have gone up over 5 years, less than 1% after inflation. And this is true at every level of education. It's true for college graduates. It's true for high school graduates. It's true for people who didn't graduate high school. It's true for people who had some college but didn't earn a degree. And actually, the worst in these terms are professionals and people with graduate degrees. Their real earnings over this 5-year period actually declined about 0.75%. But basically what's happened is earnings stagnated. Now, but there's, but the overall economy, the productivity of the economy has increased more than 10% in this period. So that means we were producing more. And so normally when workers' productivity goes up, their earnings go up. Well, that didn't happen. So the question is, what happened to all those benefits from productivity? Well, the other major part of income is what's called capital income. That's interest and dividends and capital gains. 88% of all capital income is captured by the top 10%, and 52% of all capital income is captured by the top 1%. What happened to capital income while earnings were flat? It grew 30%. That's what happened to productivity. That's what happened to growth. It was all channeled into capital income, which is incredibly concentrated. One other point, the government subsidizes a lot of areas of that people think of when they think of affordability. They subsidize food, mainly through the SNAP program. They subsidize healthcare through ACA, through Medicaid, and they subsidize energy, mainly through all the support for wind and solar and other sustainable forms of energy, as well as the tax breaks for oil companies. Well, what has the Trump administration done about affordability? It made it worse. First of all, it cut the subsidies for food. Second of all, it's slashing the subsidies for healthcare. Third, it cut the supports for energy. And it did, and plus, it raised prices directly through tariffs. So everything the administration has done has made America less affordable. I like to say we don't live in a MAGA country, we live in a Mala country. Make America less affordable. And the last piece of this puzzle is, what did they do with all the money that they quote unquote saved by slashing Medicaid, slashing energy programs, slashing food support? What did they do? They gave tax cuts to the people who collect the capital income that grew 30% while everybody's earnings stagnated. And that is the American affordability crisis.
Well, and Rob, I'll add one other piece to all that, and thank you for laying that out so cogently, is that this sort of attack or abandonment of working people in the middle class for the oligarchical class, however, whatever the words are we use to describe it, is also reinforced by how Trump is attempting to move the tax burden away from wealthy people to working people. This is intentional. He talks about this. He talks about how he wants to go back to a world before there was an income tax, because he and his friends don't want to pay capital gains. They don't want to pay income taxes. And so the tariffs are also not, they're higher prices, but it's also a taxation without representation. It's a tax that is being paid largely by people who are working people, because if you're a very wealthy person, an increase in grocery prices by, 6%, 5%, you can absorb. It's no biggie. And so you also have to sort of make all of this worse, is that this is a attempt to structurally change the tax burden, to move some of the tax burden in the country away from the people making all the money, the wealthiest, who's had their taxes cut, who can afford all these prices, and now are also going to be permanently, if the tariffs remain legal and permanent, will be having this tax burden put on them permanently. And so it is remarkable in its audacity, in
Yes.
how obviously it is a betrayal of working people and a way of taking care of Trump and all of his buddies.
Well, it is, I don't know whether we would call it revolutionary or counter-revolutionary. I think I'd call it counter-revolutionary. It is a different vision of society and who matters in society. In that sense, it is very radical for the United States, for a society founded on the self-evident truth that all people are created equal. And so for a president to try to reverse that, to try to consign that to kind of the dustbin of history, is very, very radical. Look, he's backed by a movement, which is the only way that you can undertake radical change. And the only way to counter a movement is with a counter movement. And I know that's part of your mission, Simon.
Yeah, well, and Rob, I want to just drill down on the tariffs for a minute, because we're still operating in a place where there are going to be elections next year. The Republicans just got obliterated in these November elections. We had this race in Tennessee. Lincoln, are we okay? Are we getting echo? Okay. That was competitive, was far more competitive than they would have wanted. Republicans are all waking up to how the issue environment, the political environment, is going to be very, very challenging for them next year. And so an obvious thing for Trump to do, right, if he wanted to address the politics of this sort of deteriorating, eroding political landscape for them, would be to reverse the tariffs.
Yeah.
And I think that, let's just spend a little bit of time talking about why that is so hard for him and why the tariffs are so important to him. This was not something that was passed by Congress. They've been determined to be illegal in every court that has looked at them. The Supreme Court may rule that way. We don't know. It's unlikely, because when do they ever rule against him on anything that matters, right? But let's just talk about how we got to a place where Trump was so wedded to an economic policy that was obviously causing him so much political pain, causing the economy to slow down, was doing so much harm to the country, to his own political prospects. And there's no talk of reversing it, which would be easy to do, right? It would be easy for him. And let's just speculate here. I'm now asking you to go to a place where you're not sitting with data, right? Where you're, as you often do, you stay very wedded to your data. But I want to just spend a little time talking about the centrality of the tariffs to everything that he's doing and why this matters to him so much. Because part of the argument I made in my own piece today was that the tariffs were also, in addition to being economically damaging to us, they are the unraveling of the entire economic system that was built after World War II, that spent 80 years trying to eliminate tariffs. Tariffs were seen, in essence, as like chemical weapons, right, by people in your profession. In many ways, they were damaging. They led to World War II because trade wars became shooting wars. So just talk about the blow to the international system that these unilateral, wildly ambitious, aggressive tariffs, many of which violated, trade agreements that we had with countries that were signed, bound, Senate passed agreements that we had with some of our closest allies, right? Violated these treaties that we had. Just talk about the other aspect of this that is so harming to our national interest?
Well, one of the ways to think about this is to look at the history of the decline in tariffs. We started cutting tariffs in the 1950s under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which was part of the new World Economic Order. It was created, at the same time that the World Bank and the IMF was created, and it was designed to negotiate to bring down tariffs. But for the first decade, the biggest progress on tariffs was done unilaterally by the United States. We just cut tariffs. We didn't ask for anything. We did ask for one thing in return. You could get much lower tariffs for your goods entering the United States if you aligned with us and not with the Soviet Union. It was a primary instrument of US policy for the Cold War. It was a way of cementing NATO and all of our military alliances. It was parallel to them. And the unwinding of that regime by imposing global tariffs, that is on every country, at the highest levels we've seen since the 1930s. Even in the current state where he's cut a lot of them to 10%, it's still higher than, it used to be an average of 1.5% to 2% globally. So it is not simply about prices. It's about the quality and character of our relationship with all of our allies. Not only because, we don't have any tariffs on our enemies because we don't trade with them. We don't trade with Russia. We don't trade with Iran. We don't trade with North Korea. So it goes hand in hand with the attacks on NATO, with the attacks that you wrote about today, on the understanding that we don't interfere in each other's electoral politics, that we respect the people of France and the people of Germany and the people of England and the people of Japan and the people of Korea to govern themselves. The new national strategy says we are going to support, the United States is going to support anti-immigration parties across Europe. This is another breach in our alliances, which is to say, it's another fissure in world peace.
Right. Well, and the reason that at Hopium that we've been so focused on the tariffs is because of our time together in understanding about how Clinton's central kind of thrust of his presidency was to extend the American system to the unaligned and communist world after the end of the Cold War, which was, I still believe was wildly successful, and we're going to be debating this for the rest of our lives. But there was a strategy here, which was to extend the American-led global system to large chunks of the world that were outside of it and during the Cold War period. And that was why he was, and you and I were part of that, part of the, the strategic thinking behind that, and also the execution of that. And I think for those of us who saw our power, grow, the economy explode during this period of globalization, America became the wealthiest country in the world. Incomes went up, right? Yes, people at the upper end got very wealthy, and so on. But we also dealt with that during the Clinton administration by raising taxes on wealthy people higher than any other administration has done in many, many decades. But jumping ahead is that what I want, the reason I asked you to go through this is that I believe that the tariffs and the reason he's holding on to them with in a way that is so obviously disadvantageous to the United States and to his own political prospects and his party's political prospects, is that I really do believe that on some levels that, he is acting that one of his central thrusts as leader is to dismantle the American-led global order that we built after World War II and that Clinton and others extended after the end of the Cold War. And in essence, this was a global order that won the Cold War against China and Russia in particular, right? And that this has been this is in some ways his big project, which is it isn't to make America great. It's not to grow our economy. It's not to help working people in America. It's not to create greater prosperity. It's to unravel this global system that has been the key to our security, to our prosperity, to our freedom, and to the freedom of people all around the world. And the tariffs accelerated the process of the ending of that global system. And it's why that it seems so illogical that they are holding on to this, that the obvious political thing is they're now talking about, extending the ACA subsidies for a year or two. That's working on the margins of the problem, right? The problem, the affordability problem, which is going to get worse because of the healthcare attack in healthcare, it's the tariffs and, that are driving up prices on everything and will keep prices high, permanently, right? This is not, they have this fiction they tell that, things are going to snap back and everything in 6 months are going to be reconciled. It's just wild invention and lying, right? Coming from them. And so here we have a president that's not only devised a strategy that's enriching wealthy people here in the United States and hurting middle-class people, but it's doing extraordinary levels of damage to our global brand and to the global system that made American corporations, the envy of the world, as part of his strategy to get rid of research, to sort of eliminate our research and academic, global research and academic advantages. It seems like this is part of this broader agenda to sort of weaken America in relative to our competitors in a way that is, doing enormous harm to our future prospects.
He has one other reason to keep the tariffs in place. He needs the money. It's several $100 billion a year. We already are running deficits that are nearly equal to all domestic saving. And that's not just personal saving, it's also corporate saving, retained earnings. And that means we're totally dependent on foreign investors to float our debt, much less for business investment. And it comes out in relatively high longer-term interest rates, which have been high, which rose initially when his whole budget and big, beautiful bill was passed. So he's got without that money, no matter who he names to head the Fed, and no matter what they do to the federal funds rate, which is the shortest term rate of the economy, it's for overnight loans between banks. That's what the Fed directly controls, the interest rate they directly control, no matter what they do with that. The 10-year rate, the 20-year rate, the mortgage rate, credit card rates will go up. And then he's stuck in another box. So I think you're right that I certainly agree with you that the The tariffs are part of his overall dark vision for the United States, and particularly for democracy. But he's also got a direct political motive here.
Well, and it's why, thank you for what you just did, because it's why we should, as Democrats, be making getting rid of the tariffs our central engagement with them, in my view, right? Because it is doing so much harm to us around the world. It is unraveling the global system that has kept us prosperous and free. It is raising prices on working people. It is, and what happens is that if the tariffs go away, if he's forced by the courts or even by Congress, right? Because the Senate voted to repeal the tariffs just a few weeks ago. I mean, if somehow we were able to reverse the tariffs, what would inevitably have to happen next, Rob, is that they would have to raise taxes on wealthy people in America to deal with the fiscal problems that would come from the loss of revenue. And so if your goal is to reverse the tax cuts for the wealthiest people in America, one of the ways you get there is by attacking and undermining the integrity of the tariffs themselves, right?
Well, yes, absolutely. Though I don't, I think he'd cut Medicare and Social Security before he'd raise taxes.
But Congress would have a say in that.
Congress would have a say. Congress would not go along. That's correct.
No, they are. I mean, this is why, in my view, as a political strategist, we have to be putting far more pressure, not just on affordability, which is important. And you've done a great job at explaining the sort of the economic background to what's happening with people and why this has become so salient. But it's also because the tariffs are so destructive and are doing so much harm to the country. And it should be our policy that we want them to go away and make him defend the indefensible. I mean, his polling on trade issues, on economic issues, on inflation are now regularly in the 30s. I mean, his polling on these basket of issues are often below his own standing. And so if we want to keep weakening the regime, because this would also be an incredible blow to his legitimacy and his authority if he had to sort of give up on the tariffs. It would be and so go ahead, Rob.
It would be the end of his presidency politically, which he also knows, because it's his signature issue. And so to back down, I mean, he would say, well, he would try to paper it over and say, well, I've got commitments for $20 trillion in new investments. All of that is just the smoke and mirrors. There's no fire under it at all. He said he had $1 trillion from Japan, and Japan said, wait, we're not going to increase investment at all. But it would, look, when you have a presidency that's built on really mindless economic policies, destructive foreign policies, and a theater of cruelty, which is what he is also creating, not only through the murder of the people in the boat that they attacked, but also every day in the treatment of people who some group of people in masks believe might be undocumented, or they don't like the look of them. These people are totally unconstrained by any laws. So that's why I think of it as a theater of cruelty.
And the way, Rob, one of the way I think about this, the way you just articulated all this, is that he's essentially this is a secessionist movement from the West, right? I mean, he's literally seceding from all of the theories and concepts of the modern West about democracy, about human rights, about how the economy works, about rule of law. I mean, it's a secession movement and the NSS document that just came out is in essence a confirmation of their secession, which is that they are essentially, in essence, we've seceded from NATO, right? I mean, it's very hard to understand how NATO could exist under the current theory of or at least our involvement in NATO, right? I mean, this is why I'm calling it a secessionist movement. He's withdrawing the United States from this world that America built, right? He's undermining it and its values by withdrawing and attacking it. And whether that's the fact that America didn't show up at the G20, this in the last few weeks, or that we didn't show up. There was no American representation at COP. We've withdrawn from the WHO, right? He's systemically undermining and withdrawing the United States from a world that we built to push our values and to make us powerful and prosperous and free, which then obviously undermines all of us too. I mean, this is a incredible blow to the ability for America to dictate its own future. He's empowering China and Russia at our own expense. I mean, and I called it earlier in a meeting I was in, he's relitigating the Cold War so that China and Russia have actually now end up winning it and not, losing it. And I think this is the enormity of this. This is why this affordability issue is actually about a lot more than just about prices. It's about his vision of the world where America becomes the opposite of great. And it's why it's so important that we have to fight.
But it's Europe hasn't been cowed.
No.
And the American people have not been cowed. He has 36% support. We're very close to the base of the Republican Party. And in a period of, radical partisan polarization, it's very hard to lose your base. And there is new research, incidentally, that people who self-identify with the MAGA movement and majorities approve of the use of violence in immigration. That is a majority of self-identified MAGA people. Election fraud, crime, a whole range of issues. And so there is, the next dark place we're all going to have to begin to look at is his embrace of violence.
Well, let me get one other thing before we go that I want to get just given your role as the Undersecretary of Commerce back a few years ago, Rob, is that today the jobs report was supposed to come out.
Right.
And it didn't. Right. And, we've now seen Trump made a decision to pull resources from the agencies that produce the basic numbers to help us understand the economy. We also have seen now news accounts of them just vaporizing data sets and other measures that they know will start documenting the harms they're doing to the country. They are starting to undermine the integrity, of the entire data collection system around the economy. And I just wondered if you could, as somebody who, helped oversee the census and or as a data guy, right, have done a lot of work. I mean, what are we to make of this? And should we believe that should Democrats be making the restoration of independent data, part of our negotiating wish list, with Republicans, because this is unbelievably dangerous stuff for us in a way that consistent with some of the other dangers and harms that Trump is doing to the country.
It is consistent with the basic ethos and culture of this administration, which is what is true is what Trump says and wants to be true. That truth is no longer constrained by facts or reality or data. And, one of the things, the way all these data are collected is that companies self-report. They do it online. They thousands and thousands of companies have agreed that they submit all these data, whether it's labor data or price data or production data, online. It goes directly to the Census Bureau, which then gives it to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Bureau of Economic Analysis. And what they did during the shutdown was they shut that down. If you tried to submit the data, you got a notice that this is not operating right now because the government has shut down. Nobody had to actually receive it, right? It was machine to machine. So this is necessary in order to sustain the leader's delusions and ability to try to convince the public. The problem is that you cannot convince people that their economic conditions are different from what they actually experience. He thinks like, he thinks like an old media guy, that so long as it's on television, that's all that matters.
Right.
As if anybody watches television anymore.
I mean, I think this is an important point that I've written about. I wrote about a few weeks ago. Is that people talk about how, well, Trump doesn't think there's ever going to be an election again. They're going to shut down the election, so he doesn't care about poll data. I have this other theory, which is that they went head to head with us in 2024, and they beat us. Their campaign beat us. Their campaign was better than we were, and that built into his understanding of the moment is an arrogance that he'll be able to bullshit his way through everything next year with voters. And so it doesn't really matter what's happening, where the polls are today, is that once they turn their campaign machine on, which is now being fueled by unprecedented bribes and corruption, funded by unprecedented bribes and corruption, that they'll be able to, like they did in 2024, they'll be able to bullshit their way through all this. And they're wrong about that. I mean, and I think that this is part of this is my explanation for part of the reason that they aren't course correcting in their governing to sort of make things better for people so they are less unhappy, because he believes that he's going to be able to use his money machine and his superior campaign apparatus next year to essentially, as you're describing, convince people that something is true that isn't. And I think this is a huge error in their theory of the case, and that it would be far wiser for him to course correct and to mitigate the damage of his healthcare cuts, to roll back the tariffs, right? To do things that would actually make people's lives better. But they're choosing not to do that, right? He's taken the ACA subsidy increases off the table. He's done that. He's willing to let the healthcare system suffer extraordinary damage. He was willing to let SNAP benefits expire and do enormous harm and let people starve in America. To your point, the theater of cruelty. He's willing to throw people into foreign gulags, to kill innocent fishermen in the Caribbean. And he, instead of course correcting to sort of make himself more popular, he's doubling down on these policies that will inevitably make things worse for everybody next year. Things are going to get worse for people. They're not going to get better. There is no scenario really that things are going to improve for the United States next year, given everything you've described, right? Or at least people's understanding of how they of where they are in relative to the economy.
The economy, apart from all the purchases, the investments, associated with the AI mania right now, building mania right now. The economy is either flat or in recession, if you look at everything else. And this is it's not just my view. Paul Krugman agrees with this. Janet Yellen agrees with this. All economists who actually are tracking the data can see this. And there is, when you go down like that, you don't suddenly pop up.
Right.
The economy has inertia. You tend to continue to go down until you change the underlying conditions.
Right.
So go up.
That's my whole point, right? I mean, and I'll end with this, Rob, is that the whole conversation is, I always love talking to you because it just reminds us of just the inanity of all this and how insane this all is, and just how destructive and crazy. I mean, Ruth Ben Ghiat came to speak to us last week, and she used this phrase about Trump, that he's both sane and insane, right? And I love that as a way to describe him, because it sort of speaks to our own experience with him, right? That there are moments when he seems rational and normal, and then there are these other moments where he seems literally batshit crazy, and is trying to work through that, right? In our understanding of him. But the point I want to end with is that it is stunning to me, as somebody who's been talking about economic data, studying economic data for 33 years, almost more now, how completely disconnected they have become from the reality of what's happening underneath them, and that the scale of the lying and the delusion that they are maintaining in their public commentary is shocking. And I think that we are in a place where, it was, anyway, I could go on for a long time about this, but it's the totality of the economic agenda. It's not just the prices and the tariffs and the assault on our healthcare, which I think, by the way, we all know could end up being far more damaging to the healthcare system that is just based on the withdrawal of funding, right? Yeah. We could see real carnage with regular people, with the healthcare system itself. It's like an attack on our entire healthcare system, but also mass deportation are creating labor shortages and hurting small businesses. The tariffs are been devastating for small businesses and farmers in the United States. The cuts to our research and is going to make it less likely that we produce the innovative companies of the future or stay healthy as a nation. I call it, an agenda of sabotage, plunder, and betrayal is the line that I use. And I think that the scale, the thing that I talked about in my piece today is that we have to figure out how to really talk about this in plain, simple language about what they're doing. And it's not just that they are making things more expensive and they're hurting our healthcare system, that this is an incredible assault on the country itself and our future. And it's far more malevolent than it appears, I think, when you look at it in its totality, right? And so I'm grateful for your continued help to help us understand what's happening. You've been a great teacher of mine now for many decades, and I'm grateful when you come by and hang out with us. And I'll give you the final word today if there's anything else you want to cover before we go.
Well, first of all, I'm happy to come anytime, you know that. The final word is that, again, don't be cowed. Don't be discouraged. He has not been able, he is trying to gerrymander the results of the next election. Gerrymanders don't work in a wave election, first of all.
Right.
It's every act of protest and resistance to this, it's contagious. It encourages other people it signals people who feel the same way but feel isolated, that they're not alone. Again, he is the head of a movement, and historically, the only way to stop a leader with a dedicated movement behind him or her is with a counter movement. If we do it right, this too will pass.
Your lips to God's ears, my friend. Thank you for your great piece in Washington Monthly. Lincoln, can we bring it back up? Do you have the ability to show everybody affordability, how Trump has made it worse? I'll link to it, obviously, at Hopium. Rob, thanks for your many decades of thoughtful advocacy for a brighter future for all of us. Thank you for this piece, and happy Friday to you and to everybody who's watching. And listen, I to echo what Rob said, we just have to keep fighting. Right? The line I use is people are pissed, and we have to keep fighting. And the regime is weakening, and when they're weakened as they are, is when you have to really hit them on multiple fronts.
And explain to people why they feel so uncomfortable and bad.
Right.
About the country.
Yeah. Well, and your piece does a lot to help us understand the economic moment more cogently. Right. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, everybody. Keep fighting, everybody.